Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating piece of science, a landmark 2013 study published in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine. In this explainer, we're going to dig into exactly how a super common, totally accessible dietary habit might just be the key to a longer, healthier life.
So let's just dive right into the big question here. Can a simple daily snack actually help you live longer? We live in a world that is just bombarded by fickle diet trends and completely contradictory health advice. It's exhausting, right? But the researchers behind the study, they wanted to cut through all that noise. They wanted to look past the fads and focus purely on hard, measurable data to see if eating a handful of nuts every day actually moves the needle on human longevity.
And to answer a massive question like that, well, they needed data. A lot of data. And they definitely got it. They analyzed an absolutely staggering 3,038,853 person-years of follow-up data. Now, if you're not a statistician, a person-year is basically a scientific measurement that combines the number of people in the study with the amount of time they're followed. Over 3 million person-years, that gives this study an unprecedented sense of scale and reliability. This isn't just some quick 30-day snapshot. It is literally a cinematic epic of human health.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the quest for longevity.
In this original 2013 publication, the scientists leading the charge, who were from incredibly prestigious institutions like the Harvard School of Public Health and Brigham and Women's Hospital, by the way, wanted to completely isolate the association between eating nuts and our overall risk of dying. They essentially wanted to strip away all the statistical background noise and find out what actually happens to total and cause-specific mortality when people eat nuts.
Moving right along to Section 2, a massive 30-year study.
To build a rock-solid foundation, the researchers utilized two massive, totally independent cohorts. They looked at the Nurses' Health Study, which contributed over 76,000 women, and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study, bringing in over 42,000 men. By studying both of these groups, they secured a highly balanced, rigorously documented, and incredibly reliable pool of participants.
This wasn't a quick turnaround either. The strict chronologic journey of the study ran all the way from the 1980 baseline for the women and the 1986 baseline for the men, all the way to 2010. But here is the absolute most vital part of this timeline. The dietary questionnaires were updated every 2 to 4 years. Think about that. They didn't just ask them once what they ate in 1980 and call it a day. They repeatedly checked in over decades to capture their long-term habits as accurately as humanly possible.
But, the researchers had a pretty significant hurdle to clear. What if people who are already sick change their diets, or suddenly start avoiding nuts, which would effectively skew the data? Well, to fix this, they instituted some extremely strict exclusions. Anyone with a baseline history of cancer, heart disease, or stroke was completely excluded right from the start, to make sure they had exceptionally clean data and weren't just seeing what scientists call reverse causality. They made certain everyone was free of major chronic diseases when the clock started ticking.
Which brings us to Section 3, the dose-dependent benefit.
The absolutely crucial point to grasp here is the concept of a dose-dependent relationship. In science, this is basically a relationship where increasing the frequency of a habit, so in our case snacking on nuts, corresponds to a progressively stronger effect or outcome. It simply means the more consistently these people practice the habit, the greater the statistical benefit they actually experienced.
The data clearly shows the hazard ratio, which, just for context, represents the risk of dying, dropping significantly as nut consumption goes up. For folks eating nuts less than once a week, the ratio sits at 0.93. Bump that up to 2 to 4 times a week, and it drops to 0.87. But for those consuming nuts 7 or more times a week, that hazard ratio drops down to a remarkable 0.80.
And that leads us to the ultimate takeaway from that downward trend, a striking 20% reduction in total mortality for daily nut consumers. Let that sink in for a second. Compared to people who never ate them, those who consumed nuts 7 or more times per week experienced a 20% lower death rate, and that's even after the researchers adjusted for a whole wide range of other known risk factors.
Okay, but we definitely need to address the elephant in the room here. Nuts are nutrient-dense for sure, but they are also packed with calories and fat. So a lot of people might naturally assume eating fatty nuts every single day is going to cause weight gain, right? Well, the data showed the exact opposite. Frequent consumers were actually leaner, they exercised more, and crucially, they gained less weight over the course of the 30-year study. This just further reinforces that the health association we're seeing is a truly independent benefit, not some hidden recipe for obesity.
Let's move into Section 4, Targeting the Big Killers. Looking directly at the data from the New England Journal of Medicine, we can evaluate the hazard ratios for death from very specific causes. It gives us a highly credible peek into the cause-specific mortality rates. Essentially, the data shifting shows a significantly reduced risk of death from those specific major illnesses among the people eating nuts. When the researchers broke all of this data down by specific disease categories, a really profound pattern emerged. The study found significant inverse associations for the absolute biggest killers in our society, meaning eating nuts wasn't just linked to some vague idea of general longevity, it was specifically linked to a significantly reduced risk of dying from heart disease, from cancer, and from respiratory disease.
Now you might be wondering at this point, does the type of nut matter? Actually, fun fact, peanuts are technically legumes, not nuts. But interestingly enough, it completely didn't matter if participants ate peanuts or actual tree nuts like walnuts and almonds. Both types showed remarkably similar benefits when it came to mortality reduction. So whether it was a peanut or a tree nut, the statistical protection was absolutely there.
So why does this work? Let's uncover the biology in Section 5, the nutrient density factor.
Nuts are incredibly dense with bioactive substances, and the researchers point to several real heavy hitters here. We are talking about unsaturated fatty acids, high-quality protein, dietary fiber, essential vitamins like folate, niacin, and vitamin E, plus minerals like potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Oh, and phytochemicals including phenolic antioxidants and phytosterols. It is exactly this complex, naturally occurring matrix of nutrients that likely confers the cardioprotective, anti-carcinogenic, and anti-inflammatory properties that they observed in the study.
All right, let's wrap this all up in Section 6, your daily takeaway.
The researchers summarized their massive undertaking with this powerful conclusion. The frequency of nut consumption was inversely associated with total and cause-specific mortality independently of other predictors of death. And honestly, that last phrase is everything. Because they tracked so much data, lifestyle, diet, exercise, medical history, they could confidently state that this benefit was entirely independent of other factors. It wasn't just because these folks exercised more or smoked less or popped multivitamins. The nuts themselves had an independent, statistically significant association with a longer life.
So after looking at 30 years of meticulous data on over 100,000 health professionals and evaluating over 3 million person-years of human life, the evidence frankly speaks volumes. The final question for you is simple. Are you going to leverage the science in this explainer and add a handful of nuts to your routine tomorrow? Something to think about. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.